August 17th, 1969, 10:30 p.m., Pass Christian, Mississippi. The Richelieu apartments stand 3 stories tall against the Gulf Coast sky, their brick walls solid and reassuring. Inside, 23 people have gathered on the upper floors. Families, elderly residents, neighbors who decided they'd be safer together in this substantial building than scattered in their individual homes. Children sleep fitfully, while adults peer through boarded windows at the rising water below. What none of them know is that 6 miles offshore, a wall of water 24 feet high is racing toward them at the speed of a freight train. In 17 minutes, the Richelieu apartments will be nothing but scattered bricks and twisted metal, and the 23 souls inside will become part of the deadliest hurricane in modern American history. 4 days earlier, Hurricane Camille had been just another tropical storm spinning across the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. But this storm was different. As it moved northwest toward the Mississippi coast, it was feeding on Gulf water temperatures that were running several degrees above normal. The storm's central pressure began dropping rapidly, from 950 millibars to 930, then to an almost unbelievable 909 millibars by the time it approached land. To understand what this means, imagine the atmosphere as a weight pressing down on everything. When that pressure drops so dramatically, it's like the sky itself is being sucked upward, pulling the ocean with it. The lower the pressure, the higher the water rises. At 909 millibars, Camille had become a meteorological monster, the second most intense hurricane ever to strike the United States mainland. But in 1969, there were no satellite loops playing on television, no computer models predicting storm surge heights down to the foot. Weather forecasting was still largely a matter of scattered observations and educated guesses. The people of the Mississippi Gulf Coast knew a hurricane was coming, but they had no way to comprehend what was actually approaching their homes. The first real warning came from an unexpected source. On the morning of August 17th, a Pan American Airways pilot flying his regular route from Key West to Havana noticed something troubling. The storm was much further north than the weather forecasters had predicted, and it was moving faster than expected. He radioed the Cuban National Observatory, which immediately dispatched Captain Leonard Povey in an open-cockpit military aircraft to investigate. Povey's flight became the first aerial reconnaissance of Hurricane Camille. Circling the storm in his Curtiss Hawk aircraft, he could see what ground-based observers could not: a massive, well-organized hurricane with an eye so clearly defined it looked like a giant funnel carved from the clouds. More importantly, he could see that the storm was heading directly for the Mississippi coast, not the Florida Panhandle, as most forecasts had predicted. By 1:30 that afternoon, hurricane warnings were finally issued for the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but for many residents, the warning came too late to make a difference. The storm was moving at 15 miles per hour and was less than 12 hours from landfall. Evacuation routes were already becoming dangerous as the first bands of wind and rain began lashing the coast. At the federal work camps in the Florida Keys, a different drama was unfolding. Hundreds of World War I veterans, part of a government work program, were housed in flimsy barracks just feet above sea level. When word finally reached camp administrators that Camille was bearing down on the Keys, a desperate decision was made to send an evacuation train. The locomotive thundered south through increasingly dangerous conditions, its whistle echoing through the storm-darkened afternoon. At Islamorada Station on Upper Matacum Key, veterans with nothing but the clothes on their backs climbed aboard, hoping to reach the mainland before the hurricane's full fury arrived. But time was running out. As the train pulled away from the station at 8:20 p.m., the storm surge was already building offshore. The engineer, J.J. Haycraft, pushed the locomotive to its limits, racing against a wall of water that was invisible in the darkness but growing larger with each passing minute. Back on the Mississippi coast, families were making final preparations in homes that had weathered countless storms before. The Gulf Coast had seen hurricanes come and go for generations, and most residents believed their communities were built to last. The substantial brick buildings, the elevated homes, the deep-rooted live oaks, everything seemed designed to withstand whatever nature could deliver. But Camille was not like other storms. As the hurricane's eye approached the coast, it was generating sustained winds of 190 miles per hour, speeds that turn everyday objects into deadly missiles and reduce even well-built structures to kindling. The storm's compact size meant these incredible winds were concentrated into a relatively small area, creating a buzzsaw of destruction that would carve a path of devastation across the landscape. At 10:30 p.m., Camille's eye made landfall near Waveland, Mississippi. The storm surge arrived first, a moving mountain of seawater that swept across the low-lying coastal areas with unstoppable force. In Pass Christian, the water rose from ankle-deep to second-story height in a matter of minutes. The Richelieu apartments, where 23 people had sought safety, simply disintegrated under the combined assault of wind and water. The brick walls that had seemed so solid crumbled like sandcastles. The upper floors where families had gathered for protection collapsed into the churning surge. In seconds, a building that had housed generations of residents became a pile of debris scattered across what had once been a parking lot. Similar scenes played out across the Mississippi coast. In Bay St. Louis, where the hurricane's eye passed directly overhead, entire neighborhoods were swept clean. The storm surge, measuring 24 feet above normal sea level in some areas, carried away not just buildings but the very foundations they stood on. Streets that had existed for decades were scoured down to bare earth. At the Broadwater Beach Marina between Biloxi and Gulfport, the reinforced concrete structure managed to survive the 20-foot storm surge, though several of its double T roof members were damaged. The marina's solid construction had been designed with hurricanes in mind, and it proved its worth as one of the few structures in the area to remain standing. But survival often came down to split-second decisions and pure chance. James Mitchell, who had been working late at a marina when the storm hit, spent 6 hours clinging to a ventilation pipe on a building roof as waves crashed over him. Each wave threatened to wash him into the churning darkness below, but somehow the pipe held, and somehow he held on. When dawn broke on August 18th, the scale of the destruction became apparent. Entire communities had been erased from the map. In some areas, the only evidence that houses had ever existed were the concrete slabs of their foundations and the occasional set of stairs leading up to empty air. The human toll was staggering. Along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, 143 people died in the storm, but the true number may never be known. Entire families vanished without a trace, swept away by the surge or buried under tons of debris. In the suffocating August heat, decomposition was rapid, creating a public health crisis that required desperate measures. The decision was made to cremate bodies on massive funeral pyres at Snake Creek. More than 250 victims were burned in this way, the smoke visible for miles across the devastated landscape. Families gathered at a distance, not knowing if their loved ones were among the dead being consumed by the flames. The cleanup operation revealed the true randomness of the storm's destruction. The Mississippi Power Company building in Gulfport, a 7-story concrete structure that had opened just months before Camille struck, survived with only minor damage. Built on an elevated plaza 26 feet above sea level, with reinforced construction and specially designed windows, it had weathered the storm that destroyed everything around it. Of the building's more than 500 windows, only 13 needed replacement after the storm. The structure stood as a testament to what proper engineering could accomplish, but also as a lonely monument in a landscape of destruction. From its upper floors, employees who had ridden out the storm watched as the surge swept across the city below, carrying away cars, buildings, and lives. The agricultural impact extended far beyond the immediate coastline. In Hancock County, Mississippi, 5,000 cattle drowned in the storm surge and flooding. Cotton fields ready for harvest were stripped bare. Pecan orchards that had taken decades to mature were uprooted and scattered like matchsticks. The economic devastation would ripple through rural communities for years to come. At Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, the damage was extensive, but the human cost was minimal thanks to advanced preparation. The base chapel lost its copper roofing, and many buildings suffered significant damage, but solid construction and evacuation procedures had saved lives. Still, for those who remained to maintain essential services, the experience was harrowing. The base's weather instruments recorded wind gusts of over 150 miles per hour before the equipment was destroyed. Buildings that had been constructed to military specifications were damaged or destroyed. Aircraft hangars were torn apart, and debris was scattered across the installation like confetti. In the days following the storm, the true scope of the disaster became clear. This wasn't just another hurricane, it was a historic catastrophe that had rewritten the record books. Camille's 909 millibar central pressure made it the second most intense hurricane ever to strike the United States mainland, surpassed only by the Labor Day hurricane of 1935. The storm had also demonstrated the deadly power of storm surge in ways that meteorologists were only beginning to understand. The 24-foot surge that swept across Pass Christian was higher than a two-story building, carrying with it the force of millions of tons of moving water. No ordinary structure could withstand such an assault. Recovery efforts were hampered by the complete destruction of infrastructure. Roads were impassable, communication lines were down, and entire communities had been cut off from the outside world. The National Guard was called in to maintain order and assist with rescue operations, but the scale of the disaster overwhelmed all initial response efforts. The insurance battles that followed added another layer of trauma to the disaster. Many homeowners discovered that their policies didn't cover flood damage, which required separate coverage that few coastal residents carried. Determining whether destruction was caused by wind or water became a contentious issue that tied up claims for years. Some communities chose not to rebuild at all. The trauma of losing everything, combined with the fear that another Camille could strike at any time, drove many residents to relocate inland or to other states entirely. Entire neighborhoods along the coast were abandoned, their former locations marked only by empty lots and the memories of those who survived. But others were determined to rebuild stronger than before. New construction followed stricter building codes, with houses elevated higher and built to withstand stronger winds. The Mississippi coast began to develop the hurricane-resistant architecture that characterizes it today. Elevated structures, reinforced construction, and designs that allow storm surge to flow underneath rather than through living spaces. The lessons learned from Camille influenced hurricane preparedness across the Gulf Coast. The storm had demonstrated that even the strongest structures could be destroyed by extreme storm surge, leading to new approaches to coastal construction and land use planning. The concept of building to withstand specific storm scenarios became standard practice. Hurricane Camille also marked the beginning of modern hurricane reconnaissance. Captain Povey's brave flight into the storm had provided crucial information about its location and intensity, proving the value of aerial observation. This led to the development of the Hurricane Hunter program that continues to provide vital data for storm forecasting today. The storm's impact on weather forecasting was equally significant. The failure to accurately predict Camille's track and intensity exposed serious weaknesses in the existing warning system. In response, the National Weather Service expanded its network of observation stations and improved its communication systems, laying the groundwork for the modern hurricane warning system. Today, more than 50 years after Hurricane Camille, the Mississippi coast shows few visible scars from the storm. Modern development has replaced the destroyed communities, and new generations have grown up with only stories of that terrible August night. But the memory of Camille lives on in building codes, evacuation procedures, and the collective consciousness of a region that learned never to underestimate the power of a hurricane. The official death toll from Hurricane Camille stands at 143 people along the Gulf Coast, with additional fatalities in Virginia, where the storm caused catastrophic flooding after moving inland. But the true human cost extends far beyond these numbers. There are the families who were never reunited, the communities that disappeared entirely, and the survivors who carried the trauma of that night for the rest of their lives. Hurricane Camille didn't just destroy buildings and take lives, it changed forever how Americans think about hurricanes and coastal living. The storm revealed that no community, no matter how well established or well built, is immune to complete destruction when faced with a storm of such incredible intensity. For those who lived through Hurricane Camille, it was more than just a weather event. It was the night their world ended, and a new, more cautious world began. The storm's legacy lives on, not just in the communities that rebuilt stronger, but in the knowledge that nature's power can exceed our ability to prepare for it, and that survival sometimes comes down to nothing more than being in the right place when the unthinkable happens. If you found this story compelling, consider sharing it with others who might benefit from understanding the real impact of extreme weather events. And if you're interested in learning more about hurricane preparedness and the science behind these incredible storms, there are resources available that can help you better understand and prepare for the natural forces that continue to shape our world.